Hello, and welcome to the next Poetry Anthology lesson, looking at Checking Out My History by John Agard. If we were in class, this is the first task we'd do. We'd be looking at topics in history. Think back over your time at school, could be primary or secondary. What big topics, events, time periods did you look at in history lessons? And also the challenge says here, what links do you see between these topics? As always, I'd suggest you spend 5 minutes or so looking, and then 5 seconds in the video. So in past years when I've done this lesson, these are some of the things kids come up with. And as you can see, it's a broad range of different subjects. If you are looking for links, you're looking at stuff like Cold War, World War, so a lot of it's about violence and conflict. You might be looking at stuff like sort of Hastings and Jack the Ripper and Titanic, so a lot of it obviously is to do with maybe British history. But two of the things that stand out, or I hope they stand out, are the fact that it tends to be quite masculine, tends to be focused on sort of big male characters, and then also it tends to be quite white orientated. Whilst you might argue that the slave trade obviously involves some of the history of black people in the world, it's in a very negative kind of fashion. It's not being explored in a way that is positive. That's what John Agard looks at in his poem Checking Out My History. So it's worth sort of bearing that in mind first and foremost, that actually our history that we look at tends to be governed by kind of white, masculine historical figures more than anything else. Now, John Agard is from Guyana, which is in South America. And this is just a sort of bit of a summary of his country's history, where we had the idea that sort of there used to be nine native tribes in Guyana. Christopher Columbus found Guyana, then you had the Dutch, the British, Venezuela, all took control of a section of the land or took control of the whole land. 3 separate colonies were joined to make British Guyana. Venezuela and Britain argued over it. Guyana became independent only in 1966. And then it formed part of, it became a republic and a member of the Commonwealth. It's worth bearing in mind here that basically what is interesting about this in terms of context is our history is tied up in sort of who we are as people. And as a man from Guyana, he had a history in terms of his people and his society that was very, very mixed and very, very kind of confused in some ways. And even as recently as the last however many decades, the CIA and the UK government still interfered with who would be chosen as leader. So there's a lot of competing forces that might have left someone like John Agard slightly confused about what history kind of the impact of history upon him as a person. Now, he talks about ideas around history, and the 5 people that are on the slide here, I'd assume that you'd know at least of Rosa Parks and of Martin Luther King, but he also goes on to mention people like Nanny of the Maroons, Toussaint Louverture, and Mary Seacole. And these are people that are worth celebrating in history, but perhaps get lost when we are looking at the history that we do in the schools in primary and secondary. So just very briefly, Toussaint Louverture is a Haitian. He was the leader of the Haitian Revolution. So Haiti revolted against their leaders, the French. So you had a man who was inspiring other black people in his country to rise up against the oppressive nature of the white people who were trying to control them and oppress them. And in similar ways, Nanny of the Maroons is a Jamaican national hero who did similar, who led some African slaves who revolted against their masters in Jamaica. So these are 2 people that have made significant strides and significant moves to make their people's lives better, and we don't really hear about them at all. And this is what John Agard is trying to challenge. Now, I'm going to go straight into the analysis here, because what I would suggest you do before you do this bit is listen to John Agard speaking it out loud. Firstly, because he is a performance poet, so therefore he does, the way he says it, the way he does it is part of the performance. And also because it is said in his own accent/dialect. It emphasises that it is his story, though. He is proud, therefore he chooses to talk the way he talks. He doesn't decide to write poetry the way maybe we've been taught to write poetry in schools. He is saying it in his own language, especially when the poem is about identity in particular, that becomes incredibly important. So we have initially the dem tell me. So we start off with a repetition here, and dem, you could argue, is white culture perhaps, or schools or teachers or governments. Dem, they are the people who tell him about what they want to tell me. And it argues the idea that white culture is somewhat choosing to say what they want about history more so than perhaps what actually happens in history. We as a society and governments choose curriculums, and schools decide what to teach, and exam boards put things on exams. there's a decision made for us about what we teach in the school and what you learn. And he is kind of saying that they tell us what they want to tell us rather than perhaps what happened. He uses quite strong imagery here: bandage up my eye, blind me, the idea of not being able to see, perhaps, the fact that he hints at sort of the violence and the injury caused by this, perhaps, and also about, if you're bandaged up or blinded, you can't see the truth. And that is perhaps what they're trying to do. And in not knowing about his history, it blinds me to my own identity. So he feels like he is struggling to perhaps find out the person he is. The boxes that you see, I mean, the structure is quite interesting here, because you have a very, very clear differentiation between stanzas, where we have the stanzas that are kind of normal, and then the stanzas that are slightly in the sort of margined into the screen, but also have italics. Now, the ones that are sort of, I'd say, kind of quote unquote normal, are him talking about what he was taught in the school. So 1066 about the Hastings, but he even mentions Dick Whittington and he cat. Now, the idea here to me is, you're taught not just about history, but fairy tales and stories, but they're all very much driven towards a certain kind of way of living and understanding the world around you, whilst people like Toussaint Louverture don't really get talked about. As you can see, it gets narrower. The italics in different fonts and the quicker tone, it shows the difference between the black and the white history. Basically, the bits he wants to learn about stand out. So he wants to learn about Toussaint and what he got up to, and therefore those stanzas that he talks about, those people, are important. They stand out. They're separate from the rest of what is being said. And he calls him a beacon, and the idea of a beacon being someone who stands out is powerful, a role model or an inspiration. And he talks very, very positively about all of the historical black figures that he talks about in this poem. So next part, again, there's a lot of repetition here, and the structure sort of stays quite similar between the, especially the bits that are sort of exploring the white history elements and the nursery rhyme elements. And I've said the nursery rhymes to me shows that it happens from youth, as in, we start off being told about these things and it just becomes a natural part of what we do. When he explores Nanny de Maroon, I've said it here, she helped free slaves, we talked before. Firewoman struggle. Struggle verb is a verb here, the difficulty of black lives in the past. She struggled to get her people a better life. But then he talks about ideas such as hopeful and freedom, adjectives linking to the desires of black people in the past. She's inspirational. She's someone that he could look up to and see as someone who is worth aspiring to be like. He continues to tell the stories of what we sort of see. So Lord Nelson, Waterloo, Columbus, 1492, Florence Nightingale. And he very quickly mentions three people that kind of meant a lot to black history. He sort of mentions Shaka the Great Zulu, he mentions the Caribs and the Arawaks, who are tribes. But then he goes on to talk about Mary Seacole. Now, Mary Seacole, unlike Shaka the Great Zulu and Caribs and the Arawaks, he actually goes on to talk a little bit more about Mary Seacole. And again, she is someone that he is talking about how inspiring she is. She is someone who was involved in the Crimean War, and it says here she was brave, and she was even braver than the white people. Even when the British said no, she still braved the rush and the snow. So even when they were either telling her not to go or weren't going themselves, she was going out there. And it says, sort of implies here, in my opinion, that sometimes he's saying, the history is sometimes more interesting, more important, more layered, more developed than we actually get told in class. And again, we get this kind of beautiful imagery of the healing star and a yellow sunrise. So the idea being here that, she's someone to look up to or something to look up to, and it's inspirational, it's magical and beautiful. And again, the metaphor of the yellow sunrise, the symbolism there of a new day, which might represent, a new day for the black people that have been caused by these various important historical figures. It could be the new day in terms of maybe a new approach to history and a new chance for people to learn more about stuff that we didn't perhaps learn about in the past. And it goes back right at the very end to once again to Dem Tell Me, so again the repetition. It's cyclical. By starting and ending in the same sort of way, he is implying that it kind of loops around. It keeps happening, it's still being told, nothing's changed necessarily. But he finishes, and again, the finishing lines for a poem can be quite important. He talks about the idea of how he's checking out my own history, carving out my identity. Carve here is an interesting use of a verb. He's finding out his own history, but carving has an element there, once again, of kind of violence or struggle. So actually, even with all this being said and all these kind of ideas he has about, these important people in history, he has to carve out his own identity. He has to make it happen because other people aren't necessarily doing it for him. So this is just a summary here. Agard is saying that he has told a lot about white history and nursery rhymes and sort of stories, but not so much about famous black people. He explores some inspirational black people through history, whilst hoping for a change to how history is taught or remembered. Now, this is one of those ones where the power and conflict element perhaps is slightly less obvious than Storm on the Island or London, but this is him railing against society, our attitudes towards history. It's possibly also could be seen as conflict with regards to kind of his sense of self and his sense of identity, how he feels as a black person growing up and not really learning much about black history. Also, if you're looking at power, you could argue about perhaps oppression might be a strong word, but the idea of the oppressive nature of kind of how we decide what we choose to tell people about things. So we choose a certain way of viewing history that is very, as I said, white, masculine, when perhaps that is not the fairest way or the only way to look at history, of course. Hopefully that is a good starting point for you for checking out my history. Do, as I said, have a look around and sort of see what else you can find. Use the annotations, use the PowerPoints, use everything you'll find. I'll be putting up some more videos later in the week. Obviously, any questions, do email me. Let me know how you're doing, and I will help you out as best I can. Okay, bye.